Okay, this is the Russell Poole theory of the murders of Tupac and Biggie. And now we have Snoop Dogg coming off his murder trial. And just previous to his murder trial wrapping up, he was trying to set up a deal at another record label. He was trying to move over to Warner's. He was using Death Row Records resources to record, and he was going to release those albums through Warner Brothers. Suge Knight found out about it, and he sat down and he explained the facts of life to Snoop. And he told Snoop, no, you're not leaving. You're staying, and this is how it's going to be. Now, there was a $6 million fee that was racked up, and that $6 million needed to be paid back. So it was going to be a long time for Snoop, if he stayed at Death Row Records, before he would ever see any money. And so Snoop is pissed. He's pissed because he's not seeing money. He's pissed because he has a $6 million fee to pay back. And he's pissed off at Suge Knight. You have Kevin Gaines, pissed off at Suge Knight. Sharitha Knight, pissed off at Suge Knight. David Kenner, pissed off at Suge Knight. And now the plotting begins for how they're going to topple Death Row Records and how they're going to take out Tupac. Don't forget that many of these were cops, and the cops hated Tupac. So you got cops that hate Tupac, you got Reggie Wright Jr., Reggie Wright Sr., you got Kevin Gaines, Sharitha, Snoop, Rafael Perez, David Mack. And they're a well-oiled machine, and now the target becomes Death Row Records. The rift between Tupac and Snoop starts to become bigger. We have the Roseanne Barr show, You Don't Bring Me Flowers, that Snoop's supposed to show up with Tupac. You have the House of Blues, where Tupac outshines Snoop. You have the incident in New York on September the 4th, where there's a huge rift between Snoop and Tupac. And now this rift has just grown to the point where it is out of control, to the point that Snoop thinks he's going to be killed on the flight home. He's got a knife and a fork, and he's sleeping under a blanket with one in each hand, ready to attack whoever comes and tries to kill him, because he thinks he's going to be killed on the ride home. So things have clearly gotten to the point where there's no ability to patch things up. And everybody is feeling like they're being victimized by Suge. Suge is drunk with power. He changes the record label's name from Death Row Records to the untouchable Death Row Records. And so Suge is drunk with power at this time, and it's clear that he needs to be taken out. And they're probably getting flack from the nefarious sources behind Death Row Records, gangs and crime families and what have you, saying, what the hell are you guys doing? You're creating way too much attention. And the other thing that's happening is the attention by the feds and by the task force that's investigating Death Row Records is heightening. And so it's time that they have to do something if they're going to keep this record label alive and maximize the value that they can all pull out of Death Row Records. They have to take out Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight. Well, Tupac is growing increasingly upset at the record label because he's not actually seeing the benefits of his recording. Yeah, they're bringing him over leased cars. They're dangling leased homes. They're letting him rack up bills at the Peninsula Hotel, but the money is not actually ending up in his bank account, and that's part of the strategy that Death Row Records had in dealing with all of their artists. They would give them whatever they wanted, but they wouldn't actually pay them. They didn't want them to have enough money so that they could set up their own recording sessions, so that they could hire their own attorneys and accountants and their own agents and managers and what have you. And so they tried to dry out the artists as much as they could. They tried to keep them drunk, they tried to keep them high, keep producing, keep making albums, keep making revenue, but they didn't fatten the bank accounts of the artists, and that was part of the strategy. And so Tupac started to even sour a little bit about Death Row Records. And there was the confrontation that happened between Tupac and Suge, because he had heard Snoop on the radio, and he felt like he was riding with Snoop in his murder trial, but that Snoop wasn't riding with him. And he was right. Snoop had his own agenda. Snoop had his own thing going on. There was a plan that was going on behind the scenes that had nothing to do with Tupac and Suge other than seeing them dead. And they were not in on the plan. And David Kenner goes to court with Tupac, and he, at court 3 weeks before Tupac and Suge are shot, he gets a plea bargain entered in a possession charge that Tupac, in a California case, is going to show up in Las Vegas, and he is going to perform for cops. Now here's the cop killer whose sentence is he has to go perform for cops. Can you imagine how difficult that would have been for Tupac to perform for cops at an event? And that's his punishment for a possession charge, and David Kenner's the one that makes the arrangements. Now, there's an awful lot of Death Row Records people that are ex-military. Rafael Perez, ex-military. Kevin Gaines, ex-military. Nate Dogg, ex-military. And there's more. And so they are familiar with tactics. They've been using these radios and these scanners. They used it at the party at the Mark Anthony Bell incident. David Mack would use radios and scanners in his bank robbery. They were very skilled at doing covert operations. And so the Tupac murder becomes a covert operation, just like the others that they had done, that they had orchestrated. Reggie Wright Sr. is speculating at Lake Mead who is going to run Death Row Records if something happens to Suge. Michael Moore happens to be here. He hears this, and everybody talks about how Sharitha would run the label, but then, no. Reggie Wright Jr. would end up running Death Row Records if something happened to Suge. And so the fact that they're speculating about it means that they're planning, means that the thieves are now figuring out how they are going to steal the wealth of Death Row Records. And so this is the catalyst that has now got this whole plan in motion to steal the wealth of Death Row Records. More
Playing California based vacations. Damn, all the petty waiting. I'm so impatient to I hope you in peace and peace.
Rest in peace, Machiavelli, Don, Cardinelli,
Which is Black Mama. And when I say thug life, I mean that shit. Cause these white folks see us as thugs. I don't care what y'all think. I don't care if you think you a lawyer, if you a man, if you an African American, if you whatever the fuck you think you are. Them thugs and niggas for these motherfuckers. And until we own some shit, I'ma call it like it is. I ain't gonna be a man in the store.